So, hello and welcome back here for what is probably going to be my last lecture for a little while. And so, as many of you probably know by now, unfortunately, I am on bed rest, but Dr. Ch6 will be taking over for me while I'm on bed rest and on maternal leave. And he will actually be posting lectures for you, and so you're going to hear his voice, which would be a nice change, right? For a little while, you know, you can only listen to my voice for so long, and then you need a little change. So anyway, but this will complete the material for the first exam, so that way then we'll have gotten through all of the material for the first exam. I have posted the first lecture quiz for you on WebCT underneath the Lecture 160 website, where you would find your lectures that are posted. And so you can just go to assessments and go to the very first quiz there and take that quiz. Again, just as a reminder for that quiz, you will have 2 attempts to take that quiz. Each attempt, I believe you have 20 minutes, and so it's more than enough time for 10 questions. And again, you can take that quiz if you so choose twice, and it will actually take an average of the 2 quizzes for you. So, and if you take it the first time and you like the results, then you do not need to take it the second time. So again, the idea of the lecture quizzes is really just to give you an idea of what types of questions to expect for the exam, and really to get you kind of ready for the exam, so you know, you don't go into the exam really wondering what and the heck types of questions we might have on there. So again, please take that first lecture quiz, and then I will go ahead now, once I've posted this lecture, I will post the second lecture quiz that will cover the cell chapter and then this chapter as well. So as you can see, this chapter we've kind of jumped. We've gone from talking about, you know, at the basically the chemical level of organization. So we talked about atoms and molecules, and then we bumped up and we moved into the cell chapter, and we talked about things at the organelle level of organization and then the cellular level of organization. And now in this chapter, this will be our first organ system chapter, and from here on out, basically, the rest of the course is going to be structured based on the chapters be broken up into these different organ systems. And so in each of these chapters, we're going to talk about again, how cells have come together, again, and for a common function. Specialized cells have come together for a specialized common function to form tissues. And then we'll talk about how those tissues, again, come together to form organs, and then how all those organs come together to form these different organ systems. So our very first organ system is going to be the integumentary system here. Oops, and sorry, as it always takes me about a few minutes to get used to the pens here, but again, so this would be your very first system, okay? So and the skin is going to be actually part of the integumentary system. So this is your first organ system. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about, again, how, and just as a reminder that organs, again, are body structures that are going to be composed of 2 or more different types of tissues. So you're going to see today, we're going to talk about some of the different organs that make up the integumentary system or organ system, and the different types of tissues that make up each of those organs. We'll talk about the skin, okay, as part of the integumentary system, and some of the accessory organs that it has that help to make up the integumentary system. And then lastly, we're also going to talk about the fact that there are these different types of membranes, and we'll talk about the skin is considered to be a membrane. So, and we'll talk about what's called a cutaneous membrane. So we'll talk about this coming up here in my first slide. So first off, we're going to talk about the different types of membranes that we have. And then we'll get into talking about what type of membrane skin is at the very end, and we'll probably spend the rest of the chapter then talking about that. So first off, we have many different types of membranes. The first type of membrane that we are going to talk about is serous membranes. And we've actually already talked about serous membranes when we talked about the pericardium, and we talked about the pleural membranes, and we talked about the peritoneal membranes. So serous membranes are going to line specifically body cavities that lack openings to the outside, like the thoracic body cavity and the abdominal cavity. And the important thing to remember about serous membranes is that, again, these membranes are going to be made up of a tissue type called epithelium, okay? And I know you're going to do a little bit of this in lab. So again, that will be one of the tissues that makes up this membrane, along with also connective tissue, okay, loose connective tissue. So those are the two main tissue types that make up, again, serous membranes. And so the layer of basically epithelial cells that line these serous membranes are actually going to secrete a special fluid called serous fluid. And that serous fluid is going to act as a lubricating fluid. And again, it's really important for serous membranes to surround organs that are going to be contracting and moving. So for example, you know, the heart is constantly contracting and moving. So we have this serous membrane, right, that surrounds the heart and secretes this serous fluid. Remember, it's a double membrane, and so it'll secrete this serous fluid in the middle. And I'll remind you of what this looks like here in just a minute with a picture. And that serous fluid is really important for acting again as a lubricant. So basically, as the heart contracts, again, within that thoracic cavity, to make sure that it doesn't, as it contracts, rub up against other organs and create friction, we have this double membrane around it that secretes this fluid called serous fluid. And it almost acts as kind of a gel pack, if you want to think of it that way, to basically help prevent the heart from rubbing up against other organs as it contracts. And so, again, just to remind you of what these serous membranes look like. Remember that these serous membranes are double membranes, okay? So what that means is they literally are folded back, okay, on themselves, just like this, okay? And so, and then again, they're surrounding an organ, whether that organ be the heart, whether that organ be the lungs, or whether it be the abdominal organs. So, and if you look here, it's this double layer here, okay, of these epithelial cells, okay, that are going to be basically folded back on each other. These epithelial cells are what's going to secrete the serous fluid. And the serous fluid, okay, is going to be secreted in between. So that acts as the gel pack, that serous fluid. And so again, that, you know, serous fluid is going to act as a nice lubricant preventing friction, or as a gel pack, if you want to think of it, preventing friction from building up as the heart contracts. And so it acts as kind of a buffer. And remember that it's this double layer, okay, that causes us to kind of break up the you know, layer that directly lines the organ. So this layer that directly lines the organ, and if your fist was the heart here, this would be the visceral, okay, pericardial layer, or visceral pericardium. And then where it folds back on itself, this outer layer is called the parietal, okay, pericardium. So this layer right here is going to be called the parietal pericardium. And again, we see the same thing here. Again, if you look at the lungs here, we have this inner layer right here, okay? You can see this inner layer here is called the visceral pleura. And as it then folds back on itself, this outer layer here, oops, sorry, I went way around there, but the outer layer here is called the parietal pleura. And again, those cells that line that secrete this serous fluid that you see in blue here, and now I'm coloring it red. That serous fluid is, again, what acts as the lubricant. Okay? And then it doesn't show it here, but if we were to look in the abdominal cavity surrounding all of our abdominal organs, we would have this same double layer serous membrane with, again, that serous fluid surrounding all of the abdominal organs. So those are our serous membranes. And so again, hopefully that was a good review for you on what serous membranes were. Our second type of membrane that we have is called mucous membranes. And mucous membranes actually line typically cavities and openings that are going to lead to the outside world, to the outside of the body somewhere. So again, obviously the easiest one to picture is your respiratory tract, right? Respiratory tract is exposed to the outside world, and so we have this mucous membrane that helps to line and trap particulates and bacteria and foreign objects that we might be bringing in from the outside world. So this is why we have mucous membranes. They're great for trapping stuff as we're exposed to the outside world through some type of opening. Same thing with the GI tract, okay? Again, the GI tract has two openings, and so we're going to have mucous membranes that line the GI tract. Same thing with the urinary tract. Again, we have an opening to the outside world, so we're going to have mucous membranes that help to protect that. So when we look at our mucous membranes also consist of an epithelial layer of tissue. So again, this is just certain cells, okay, specialized cells that are all, again, working together for a common function. So we call, again, this type of tissue layer that typically lines things, especially epithelium. I apologize there for a second. I didn't quite get that paused in time while my dogs barked. So again, sorry for that. But again, so you can see they consist of epithelium and connective tissue. Okay, and so the special part of the epithelium here. And I'm actually going to go ahead, unfortunately I've got to pause this for just a second here. Oops, sorry that is drying for you. So I'm just going to end this show here and pause this for just one section there. Unfortunately, one of the challenges of this program is that it's not really very easy to pause this program, so there's no real easy way to do that. But anyway, we'll get back into this here. So mucous membranes, again, are lining those cavities that are open and lead to the outside world. And again, they're going to consist of these two different tissue layers that, just like before, you're going to see, again, epithelium. They're going to consist of an epithelial tissue layer and a connective tissue layer. And inside that epithelial layer, you're going to see that you have specialized cells that are designed to produce and secrete mucus. So again, that's what makes this a mucous membrane, is that instead of having cells that secrete serous fluid, now these cells are actually secreting mucus. Our third type of membrane is a membrane called a synovial membrane, as you can see from my picture here. And synovial membranes are going to line joint cavities. And of course, they're going to secrete, instead of serous fluid or mucus, they're going to be secreting synovial fluid. And again, these membranes consist only of connective tissue this time, okay? No epithelial tissue, just connective tissues. And again, there are cells inside that connective tissue that are designed to secrete this synovial fluid. So here you can see, again, this is your synovial joint cavity here. And again, you're going to have these cells that line this and secrete this synovial fluid, okay, inside that joint cavity. And then, oops, I'm sorry, we have our last membrane, and this is obviously where we're going to kind of spend the remainder of our time, is talking about the last membrane, the cutaneous membrane. And the cutaneous membrane is going to be this outer membrane that consists of the skin. So the skin is more formally called the cutaneous membrane. And so those are the 4 types of membranes that when we talk about the different types of membranes, there are those 4 types of membranes. So again, we have serous membranes, we have mucous membranes, we have synovial membranes, and cutaneous membranes. So again, now we're going to spend the rest of this lecture talking about cutaneous membranes. So again, the skin and its tissues, or again the cutaneous membrane, has many different purposes. And one of the main functions or purposes of the skin is to help us to maintain homeostasis, to help us to maintain an internal stable environment by providing this a layer of tissues that separates our inside, the inside of the body from the outside. And so one of the main ways in which the skin helps us to maintain homeostasis is through temperature regulation. So you're going to see that there are structures inside the skin that allow us to do this. So such as, again, sudoriferous glands. We're going to talk about sudoriferous glands, which is a fancy name for sweat glands, and these sweat glands help us to do evaporative cooling. And through evaporative cooling, we can regulate our body temperature so that we maintain homeostasis. Also, our skin helps to provide protection. So again, it's leaving out some of my letters here, but it helps to provide protection of underlying tissues. So again, the skin helps to protect those tissues that are below it. It helps to prevent or retard water loss, so it keeps us from losing too much water. It also houses certain sensory receptors. So we'll even talk about some of these sensory receptors that allow us to pick up the sensations of touch and deep pressure. They also help us to synthesize certain chemicals. So again, as you probably well know, we are able to synthesize vitamin D through the skin. So again, cells within the skin allow us to synthesize or make vitamin D. And they do this, as you probably well know, when we're exposed to sunlight. And then also excreting wastes. So again, we can excrete waste, especially through things like our sudoriferous glands. When we sweat, we can help to get rid of some of these extra wastes and salts. So again, those are some of the main functions and again, make sure that you're familiar with all of these main functions of skin, okay, and its associated tissues. So when we look at the skin, okay, we're actually going to break up the skin into 2 different layers, what we call the epidermis here and the dermis. And I'm actually just going to really quick here change my the color of my pen so that you can see it here a little bit better. So we're going to try red again. But again, the epidermis here, okay, is going to be this outer layer, the outermost layer. So literally from here on out, we see all these, what we're going to call dermal papilla in a minute, these little finger-like structures here. From here on up is going to be the epidermis, okay? And then the dermis will be from those little finger-like structures all the way, okay, down. And when I say all the way down, down to, okay, where we hit what's called the subcutaneous layer. And the easy way to look for the subcutaneous layer, which is going to be below the dermis, and we call it subcutaneous because literally it means sub, below, cutaneous, okay, the cutaneous membrane, right? So the dermis and the epidermis, again, make up our skin, or again, our cutaneous membrane. And so then it makes sense that we would call this layer right below it the subcutaneous layer, below the cutaneous membrane. And the easy way to identify that subcutaneous membrane, or subcutaneous layer, sorry, is that it has adipose tissue, fat cells. So again, you can see they've drawn in yellow here, all these fat cells. So you hear the subcutaneous layer, also called hypodermis, okay? And hypodermis just means below the dermis, okay, or below the dermis layer. So again, remember that, but it's only the epidermis, the outer epidermis and the dermis, okay, that are actually making up the skin here, okay? And when we talk about the skin of the cutaneous membrane, those are the two major layers. So we're going to talk about what makes up the epidermis first, and then we'll come back and talk about what makes up the dermis. So when we look at the epidermis consists of these cells that make up, again, the tissue layers called stratified squamous epithelial tissue, or stratified squamous epithelium. That's the type of tissue that makes up your epidermis, okay? And stratified, the word stratified, means many layers, okay? Squamous means the cell type, so our squamous cells are going to be kind of these flat pancake shaped cells. And again, you're going to see when we talk about different types of tissue layers, especially when we're talking about epithelial tissue, usually the first word will tell you, okay, if there's more than one layer. If it were just one layer, it would be simple. So more than one layer is stratified. Squamous will tell you what the cell type is, and then epithelium tells you that that's the type of tissue that it is. So again, we have stratified squamous epithelium. Again, epithelium is going to be primarily your tissue layers that line things. So, and this particular tissue layer is going to lack blood vessels, okay? And that's important. So when we talk about the epidermis here, the epidermis lacks blood vessels. It's going to be very different than the dermis. The dermis below the epidermis is what's going to contain all of the blood vessels. But here, your epidermis is going to be your tissue layer that lacks blood vessels, okay? And then we have, when we look at this, we have 4 or 5 different layers that we're going to break the epidermis down, okay, into. And so the stratum corneum is actually going to be our outermost layer here, okay? And this is actually going to be the layer of mostly, and kind of what you think of on your skin, mostly dead cells, okay? So this is mostly dead cells that are basically getting ready to be sloughed off. That's your stratum corneum, okay? And then this second layer just below it is called the stratum lucidum. And this is the layer that, again, if in certain areas you have 5 layers, this is that layer. So you'll only actually find the stratum lucidum in areas where you have really thick skin. So especially in the palms of your hands, okay? And also on the soles of your feet, okay? So those would be the 2 places that you would typically find this layer, or this thick skin. Again, anywhere you can find really thick skin is where you're going to find that stratum lucidum. And that's primarily just in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. Otherwise, in other areas of the body, you're actually going to lack this layer, okay? And you'll only have 4 layers. Below that layer is the layer called the stratum granulosum, and you're going to see this in the picture in just a minute. And the reason we call it the stratum granulosum is that it's a granular layer, okay? And this is the layer in which your cells, your epithelial cells, okay, are actually producing lots of keratin. And that keratin looks very granular early on, and so it makes these cells look granular. Then there's the stratum spinosum, okay, where these are kind of developing epithelial cells. And so again, this is the layer where literally our epithelial cells are kind of growing and developing into these mature epithelial cells. And then we have the stratum basale. That's our lowest, deepest layer, I should say, okay? So this is our deepest layer by far. And so when we talk about the stratum basale, this is going to be the layer of cells where we're actually producing new cells. So this is the layer that's mitotically active, okay? And these cells are constantly undergoing mitosis and producing the cells, okay, that will eventually be pushed up to become the stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum. In the palms and soles of your feet, they would be pushed up into the stratum lucidum, and eventually the stratum corneum, and then be sloughed off, okay? And as those outer cells are sloughed off, no big deal, right? Because we are constantly producing new cells at the stratum basale. So let me show you what this looks like. Again, if we were to look at a cross-section of your skin, so we were actually able to kind of cut through your skin and look at some of these different layers, we could actually see all of these different layers. And again, remember, we're only going to see the stratum lucidum on these areas where we have lots of extra skin. Again, on your palms, your hands, and soles of your feet are going to be the common areas where you're going to see that layer. So again, the most superficial outer layer here is going to be called the stratum corneum, okay? And the stratum corneum is going to be this layer right here, okay? And there's your stratum corneum right here. And you can see your stratum corneum here on an actual slide of the epidermis is right here. And again, these are going to be mostly dead cells. We actually call these types of epidermal cells keratinocytes, because here they have lots of keratin in them. And again, that keratin helps make this kind of outer layer. Keratin's a tough protein, and that makes this outer layer a nice, tougher layer. And so these dead keratinocytes are eventually going to be sloughed off, okay? So that's our stratum corneum. Below that layer, again, in places like our palms and the soles of our feet, we're going to see we have this layer called the stratum lucidum, okay? And so here's the stratum lucidum right here. And again, we're only going to see this layer in these thick-skinned areas, palms of our hands, soles of our feet. The layer below that, okay, is what we call the stratum granulosum, okay? And if you look at this layer, the stratum granulosum is going to be this really granular layer. And here you can even see, it's a little bit harder to see on this slide, but your stratum granulosum is pretty much going to be this layer, okay, right here of these really granular dark purple cells, okay? And that stratum granulosum, again, looks granular because these cells are producing lots of keratin. So you're seeing these little granulars, these little granules, again, that are carrying kind of the early precursors for keratin. And then you're going to see the cells below that make up the stratum spinosum, okay? So all of this here is the stratum spinosum. From here, all these cells here, I'll go ahead and draw them in here. All these cells are the stratum spinosum. And so they're going to be basically everything but that bottom layer of cells, okay? So from here, again, all the way up here is going to be your stratum spinosum, okay? And the stratum spinosum is going to be these kind of developing epithelial cells. So as they're getting pushed up, again, they're going to start to produce more keratin, and as you'll see, we're going to talk about they're going to absorb melanin. So again, these are kind of your developing skin cells. And then the layer below that here is going to be your stratum basal, okay? And the stratum basal are going to be, this is basically the cell layer that's constantly producing new epithelial or epidermal cells. So these cells are actually mitotically active. They're constantly undergoing mitosis, and as they undergo mitosis, they'll push these cells up into the next layer as they undergo mitosis. So again, as they're dividing into two, they're constantly producing this next layer of cells. So as these cells, again, are producing new cells, they'll push these cells up, okay? And again, eventually, these cells will be pushed up, okay, eventually to this top layer, and then eventually sloughed off. And again, this can occur because we're continually producing new cells in this stratum basal. So these cells are constantly undergoing mitosis. And in this picture here, this would be your stratum basal here, that basically that first layer, the deepest layer of the epidermis. Okay? And so that's literally the end of the epidermis. So at this point, okay, in this picture, from here on down is the dermis, okay? So, and all 5 of these layers make up the epidermis. So now, inside the epidermis, we're going to have some specialized cells that lie in the epidermis. And so when we look here, one of these specialized cells is called melanocytes, okay? And as you can guess, melanocytes are going to produce, you guessed it, melanin, okay? So your melanocytes are actually going to lie really deep in the epidermis and sometimes even in the underlying dermis here. And so here's actually a picture right here of one of your melanocytes. And you're going to see there are these goofy looking cells right here that are going to have all these little cellular extensions, okay? And these little cellular extensions are actually going to go in between those developing epithelial cells, or between those developing keratinocytes. So remember those keratinocytes. Keratinocyte is just a fancy name for those, again, these specialized epithelial cells that are eventually, again, going to produce that outer layer of the skin. So again, this melanocyte, okay, is going to actually produce the pigment melanin. So you'll see they produce these little granules called melanin. And obviously, again, as you know, melanin is what protects our cells from the sun's ultraviolet rays. So these melanin granules will actually move, okay, from these little extensions of our melanocyte and be absorbed into the surrounding epithelial cells, or the keratinocytes surrounding that melanocyte. So you can see here these cells, and again these would be the cells that would be making up what's called the stratum spinosum, right? Okay, right above there. So those cells in the stratum spinosum can actually absorb the melanin that's produced by your melanocytes. Now what's really interesting is, of course, as you know, melanin is what contributes to our skin color. But again, there are a couple of other factors when we talk about skin color that come into play. So skin colors actually result of a combination of genetic factors, and it's important that you know, again, hint that these 3 different factors that make up skin color, okay? Skin color, it consists of this genetic factor that we're going to talk about in just a minute, and some environmental factors, and some actual physiological factors. And I'm going to talk about each one of these here coming up. So again, we're going to talk about what gives each individual the different skin colors that they have. So obviously, again, you guys know that genetics come into play here. So genetic differences in skin color actually result, believe it or not, from not from a different number of melanocytes. A lot of people might think, oh, well, now you know that melanocytes are the cells that produce melanin, that an individual with darker skin might have more melanocytes. And that's actually not true. All of us actually have about the same number of melanocytes. So all humans across the board have on average about the same number of melanocytes. However, the genetic differences come into play, and that some of our melanocytes are coded to produce more melanin and some are coded to produce less melanin, okay? So obviously, if your melanocytes are producing more melanin, then you're going to produce a darker skin color. Also, okay, the size of those melanin granules we find is different from an individual to an individual. So some melanocytes are coded to produce larger granules of melanin, and some produce smaller granules of melanin. And obviously, the larger the melanin granule, the darker your skin color would be. Okay, so those are the genetic differences, okay, that that result in kind of the different types of skin color that we have. So that's genetics. Now, when we talk about environmental factors, right, our environmental factor is number 2 here. And that is that as we are exposed, okay, to sunlight, and again, many of you have experienced this because you purposely do this to develop a tan. As you're exposed to sunlight, this actually increases the production of melanin. So your body adjusts. It says, all right, hey, we're being exposed to more UV light. So again, and to the point that your genetics will allow you to. But as you're exposed to sunlight, your melanocytes will actually produce more melanin. They'll increase melanin production. So that's your environmental factor. Okay. And the last factor is, again, a physiological factor here. And so this is just, again, something that makes up part of your physiology, and that is what type of circulation you actually have within your dermal blood vessels. Now, keep in mind this says dermal blood vessels, okay? And the reason being is, remember that your epidermis does not have blood vessels. It's your dermis below the epidermis that actually produces the blood vessels, and that actually has blood vessels running through it, I should say. And so again, depending upon what your circulation is like through those dermal blood vessels is going to affect your skin color. And you guys probably know this. Again, when you're cold, your skin appears to be more white, and that's because when you're cold, especially in your extremities, like your hands, something called vasoconstriction is going to occur, and your blood vessels are going to constrict away from the surface of the skin, basically to help hold in heat, okay? When you're warm, okay, just the opposite's going to happen. If you're really hot, then your blood vessels are actually going to dilate, okay, in that area. Even your capillaries within, which are the small blood vessels within your skin tissue, your dermal tissue, are going to dilate, and it's going to give you a more red or pink appearance. So again, this is the physiological factor. Circulation within those dermal blood vessels will affect your skin color as well. Now, of course, it's always just fun. This is kind of a fun thing to talk about tattoos and what's happening with tattoos. So tattooing is actually a permanent coloration of the skin, but this is where we're actually injecting the pigment into the dermis. This is not in the epidermis, right? Because in the epidermis, remember, these cells are continually being pushed up and sloughed off. So for us to be able to retain a tattoo, right, to retain that ink, it actually has to be injected into the dermis, okay? And that's what allows it to be more permanent, because this is actually, again, in the dermal layer of the skin. Now, what's interesting is when you talk about, having to laser a tattoo to have it removed, the reason that it is so difficult to remove a tattoo is because you actually have to take a laser, and that laser has to penetrate into the dermal layer to break up the ink particles in the dermis. And then as they break up the ink particles in the dermis, then you'll have immune cells in the dermis that will basically, engulf the leftover broken down ink particles. And so oftentimes it takes many different treatments. You have to go back to get it lasered and lasered again to be able to break up all of the ink particles in the dermis. So kind of interesting when you talk about what a tattoo is. All right, so speaking of, since we're talking about tattooing and injecting ink into the dermis, let's talk about the dermis. So again, if you're tattooing yourself, again, you are injecting ink into this dermal layer, and that's this layer, again, below the epidermis. So if you look here, this is the end of the epidermis, and you're going to see the end of the epidermis has this kind of finger-like appearance, okay? These little finger-like structures, as you're going to see in just a minute, we're going to call dermal papilla, okay? And so basically, okay, from these dermal papilla down to the beginning of the subcutaneous layer is what we call the dermis, okay? And you're going to see the dermis has a lot going on, right? Remember where the epidermis doesn't even have any blood vessels, right, running through it? Here in the dermis, we're going to have blood vessels running through there. We're going to have basically nerves running through here. So we'll have, again, nervous tissue and sensory nerves running through here. You're going to see we have lots of glands. So we have sebaceous glands that are running through here. So here is a nice picture of what we call a sebaceous gland or an oil gland. We've got hair follicles running through here. We're going to talk about that. We've got sweat glands running through here. Again, so we've got a lot that is going on, if you look here, inside the dermis. So let's talk a little bit more now about the dermis. So the dermis layer is important because it's actually what binds the epidermis to the underlying tissues. So again, the dermis actually helps to hold the epidermis onto the tissues below. And if you look, the epidermal ridges that we just talked about, okay, are what we call dermal papilla, okay? And whenever we use that term papilla, that term means a finger-like structure. So again, these finger-like structures right here, okay, are what we call the dermal papilla. It's literally where the dermis kind of pushes up into the epidermis and leaves this little finger-like structure here. So these are all the dermal papilla right here, okay? These little finger-like structures are the dermal papilla. And I'll show you another picture of this later on as we go through here as well. So again, these epidermal ridges end up forming what we call the dermal papilla. And again, they cause the dermis in this area, again, to be uneven. The dermis also consists of this connective tissue, right? And that connective tissue helps to connect the epidermis to the tissue layers below. And so this connective tissue, okay, is literally a tissue that does just what it says. It connects, right? And so it has inside that tissue collagen fibers. And collagen fibers are really tough fibers, okay? They're nice, strong, tough fibers. And then they have elastic fibers that help to give our skin a little bit of elasticity. That allows it to stretch just a little bit, but also to bounce back after it's stretched to its normal position, okay? So again, and I'm sorry that some of these, for some reason, I don't know why all of these don't come through here, but we're just going to go backwards, and that way then you'll get to see everything that's on the slide here. So then the dermal blood vessels, and so again, just to go back here, connective tissue, the collagen fibers are really form the tough fibers, and the elastic fibers that allow our skin to stretch and bounce back, again, is what gives our skin this elasticity. dermal blood vessels, okay, so basically the blood vessels that are running through the dermis actually help to carry nutrients to the epidermis. So they help to carry nutrients to the upper layers of the skin. And so basically, because our epidermis doesn't have blood vessels that are running through it, the dermis shares its nutrients with the epidermis. Because it has blood vessels to provide it and carry those nutrients to it. And again, these dermal blood vessels can also help regulate temperature. And we talked a little bit about this already. So again, you guys have all seen this. When you're cold, those dermal blood vessels are going to constrict and help to hold in heat. And then when you're hot, those dermal blood vessels are going to dilate and make themselves as wide as possible, so that way then they can release heat and hit the surface of the skin. And then the dermis also contains lots of different things that we talked about. Nerve fibers, it's going to contain sensory fibers, again, which are a type of nerve fiber. It's going to contain hair follicles, these sebaceous glands, or more commonly called oil glands. So sebaceous means this is an oil gland. And then sweat glands. Okay. And just real quick here, for me to go back, I want to talk about one of the reasons why in your epidermal layer, if you see here, the cells start to die as they are pushed up. So if you look here, right, here in the dermis is where all the blood vessels are, right? And you can see in these what we call dermal papillae, you've got blood vessels that are actually pushed up in these dermal papillae. And the reason being is that this actually increases kind of our surface area of the dermis that's exposed to the epidermis above. And what actually ends up happening is as nutrients are brought in through the dermis, right, and shared through the blood vessels in the dermis here, then nutrients will actually move out of the blood and into the surrounding cells. And now these surrounding cells can share nutrients with each other. So the dermis, these dermal cells, will actually share nutrients with these epidermal cells that surround them. However, as you get farther and farther away, okay, from the dermis, then you're going to basically put yourself farther and farther away from all of these nutrients that are available. And so that's why these cells actually start to die off. They literally are no longer getting any nutrients as they're pushed farther and farther away from the dermis. So it's kind of interesting, and that might help you kind of to remember what's happening there in the epidermis. So again, we're going to talk now a little bit more about some of these kind of accessory structures that are in the dermis. So again, especially talking about hair follicles, we're going to talk about sebaceous glands, and we're going to talk about sudoriferous glands. Oh, and real quick, before we get to that, we're going to talk about the subcutaneous layer. So the subcutaneous layer, if you remember again, is just this layer that's going to be directly below the dermis. Okay, so again, subcutaneous literally means below the, again, cutaneous membrane, or below the dermis and epidermis. The epidermis and dermis are what make up the cutaneous membrane. Okay. So the subcutaneous layer is also called the hypodermis, hypo being below and dermis, so the layer below the dermis. And this is mostly composed of this, again, loose connective tissue and also some insulating adipose. And I don't know why they cut this off again, but some insulating adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is fat tissue, okay? So again, fat tissue helps to provide some insulation. So that's really the easy way to identify fat or lipid. Lipid, again, since we use the term for those 4 major macromolecules, lipid, we'll say lipid. Adipose tissue, again, is a tissue type where these cells are full of lipids. And that's going to provide this extra insulation for us. And so it'll actually provide some insulation in terms of, again, preventing loss of heat, but it will also provide a little insulation and protection for organs that are below it. So again, that's the subcutaneous layer, and those are the types of tissues that make it up: connective tissue and adipose tissue. Okay, and again, that's, if you can't read that, it's ADIPOSE, adipose tissue. So that, remember, that subcutaneous layer now is actually going to bind the skin above to the underlying organs below it, okay? And it's also going to contain all the blood vessels that are running up to the dermis. So again, blood vessels that make it through the to the dermis are coming originally from that subcutaneous layer. And the hard part is there's no real sharp boundary that exists between the dermis and the subcutaneous layer. They kind of almost just run into each other. But typically, if you see a layer that has lots of fatty tissue, adipose tissue, then you're in the subcutaneous layer. Okay? So if for some reason you're in the medical field and you're giving what's called a sub-Q injection, okay? When you give sub-Q injections, you're actually injecting into the subcutaneous layer. This is the layer that you're injecting into. Now let's talk about some of these accessory organs of skin that are in the dermis. So, of course, we have hair follicles, right? And you guys know, again, that obviously, again, we've got hair on the surface of the skin. So let's talk about these hair follicles. So again, here would be your hair follicle right here. Again, your hair follicle is going to line the hair shaft and the hair root here. And again, hair can be found in nearly all regions of your skin. Growth of the hair is actually going to occur down at the base, okay? So growth of the hair is going to occur down here at the base. And you'll have these specialized muscles called erector pili muscles that are actually attached to the hair follicle, and those erector pili muscles will actually allow the hair to stand up. So again, we'll have these muscles, and you've got one kind of drawn in the background here. You have these little specialized muscles that attach to that hair follicle, and when, again, you get something like the goosebumps, you're cold, okay, those erector pili muscles will contract and cause the hair to stand up. So your erector pili muscles are actually your goosebump muscles, okay? These are your goosebump muscles, if you want to think of them that way. And then, again, when we look at differences in terms of hair and hair color, melanin is responsible for most hair color types, okay? So again, differences in production of melanin are responsible for most of our different hair color types. However, there are a couple different other pigments that we don't talk about, such as in red hair, we have this other pigment that you're going to see called trichosiderin, okay? Trichosiderin, that's an N there. And trichosiderin is this extra pigment that we find in red hair color. So again, this is a little bit of a better picture. I kind of like this picture showing you. This is your, what we call the hair follicle itself, okay? So here's the hair follicle. This here, the part of the hair that, again, the follicle is just basically the area that lines the hair itself, okay? So basically the cell layer that lines the hair itself. And then the hair root is going to be the portion of the hair that's actually below the surface, and then the hair shaft, okay, what's called the hair shaft, is the portion of the hair above the surface. Okay, this might help you out with lab a little bit. So again, that makes up, and the region of cell division is going to be at the base of the hair root here. So that gives you an idea of kind of what your hair follicle looks like. So again, we're going to talk about some more of these different accessory structures that are associated with this. So again, here we have the erector pili muscle right here, right? Your goosebump muscle that you can see here. So there's your erector pili muscle. And then next we're going to talk about something called your sebaceous glands. Okay, and your sebaceous glands are going to be your oil glands, and they're going to be associated with the hair shaft. Okay, so an easy way to identify your sebaceous gland is that they're always going to be associated with a hair shaft. They're going to be right next to the hair shaft here. Okay, and that's going to be very different than if you look at your sweat glands. Your sweat glands, or what we're going to call sudoriferous glands, are going to be glands that are not associated with a hair follicle, and they're going to have this long duct that leads to the surface. Okay. So sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are going to be these specialized, what we call holocrine glands. Don't worry about this. We didn't talk about holocrine glands and the different types of glands we use to, so I don't care that you know that term. We're going to focus on the fact that they're called sebaceous glands, okay? And these sebaceous glands just is a fancy term for oil glands, okay? And so these oil glands are, again, always going to be associated with hair follicles, okay? And they're going to secrete, the reason they're called sebaceous glands is they're going to secrete this substance called sebum or oil, okay? Sebum is our fancy term for oil. And that sebum is going to help to waterproof and moisturize the hair shaft. So that's why you're going to see the sebaceous glands, again, right kind of underneath the skin surface or the epidermal surface here, so they can secrete that oil to help, again, coat that hair shaft as it's pushed above the surface. So again, it will waterproof and moisturize that hair shaft. So this is kind of cool. This is actually showing you a cross section of, you can see here's the hair follicle right here, and it's here, right here, it's actually missing the hair inside the hair follicle, but that would have been the hair inside the hair follicle. And right next to this here is, you're going to see right here, this is your sebaceous gland. Look at this big bubbly sebaceous gland, okay? And that sebaceous gland dumps right into, okay, that hair follicle just below the surface there. And it will secrete, again, these oils. That's what you're seeing some of this here. These oils that will actually coat the hair as it's pushed up above the surface. Nails, okay? Nails are always kind of fun to talk about. So nails are basically just these protective coverings of epithelial cells that cover the ends of your fingers and toes. And what makes them different is obviously they have lots and lots and lots of keratin. So again, that's what makes your nail so tough, right? Is all of this extra keratin that's produced there. So again, your nails consist mainly of stratified squamous epithelial cells, okay, just like your skin, okay, that are overlying the nail bed. And you're going to see that the kind of growing region, okay, the actively growing region of your nail is actually called the lunula. This is where, again, your cells are continually produced. Oops, sorry. So it's just this area right here. Sorry, I got a little crazy there with the pen. So that's your lunula. And again, that's the growing region, and the rest of this is kind of the body of the nail. And so again, most of what makes up your nail is literally just these dead epithelial cells, these dead stratified squamous epithelial cells with lots and lots of keratin. Sweat glands, okay? So sweat glands are more formally called sudoriferous glands, okay? And sudoriferous glands, okay, so that would be the more formal name that I'd like you to know for your sweat glands, sudoriferous glands. And these sweat glands can be either what we call eccrine sweat glands, okay? And eccrine sweat glands are going to be the sweat glands that are mostly responding to body temperature changes. So again, when you're hot, these are the sweat glands that are again going to secrete again that material that makes up your sweat when you're responding to an increase in body temperature. Or, okay, and again, I apologize, that's cutting this off, but this should be apocrine. We also have apocrine sweat glands, or apocrine, okay, sudoriferous glands. So that should have been APOCRINE. I apologize that it cut that off there. It's APOCR. If you can see that, CRINE. Apocrine sweat glands. And your apocrine sweat glands are those lovely sweat glands that respond to things like stress. So for example, you have to give a presentation, you're really nervous, and all of a sudden you notice you're producing quite a bit of sweat in places like your armpits and your axillary region or your armpit. Then you can blame your lovely apocrine glands for that. So your apocrine sweat glands are going to respond to they'll respond to some changes in body temperature, but they're mostly responding to changes in stress and what we call sexual arousal. So again, in times of sexual arousal, then you'll find that you'll produce more sweat in these axillary regions as well. We also have some modified, so our sweat glands, just so you can see on this picture here, guys, our sweat glands are going to look very different than our sudoriferous glands because the sweat glands are not going to be associated with a hair follicle. These sweat glands are, again, going to just have a duct, okay, that leads all the way to the surface. So again, our sweat glands are going to look very different. Our sebaceous glands are always going to be, again, associated with a hair follicle. Our sweat glands, okay, they're going to be these kind of coiled glands down here with a long duct that leads to the surface. And then we have some modified sweat glands in the ears called ceruminous glands, okay? And they're actually, again, sweat glands that are modified to produce cerumen or earwax. And then lastly, believe it or not, mammary glands are actually modified sweat glands. So mammary glands are a modified sweat gland that obviously is modified to produce and secrete milk. So kind of interesting when you think about mammary glands, they're just modified sweat glands. So of course, again, when we're talking about sweat glands, it's hard not to just talk a little bit about how we regulate body temperature. And we've already talked quite a bit about this, but I'll just kind of recap this. So remember, again, the body is going to respond to excessive heat and excessive cold in special ways, and especially one of the ways that it's going to respond is by producing these responses in the dermis. And one of the responses in the dermis would be, if you're really hot, excessively hot, here in Arizona, midsummer, right? This is what we look like. And so what's going to happen is your dermal blood vessels are going to dilate, okay? What that means is those dermal blood vessels are going to basically increase in diameter, and they'll dilate to bring those blood vessels closer to the surface. And the reason they do that is as those blood vessels are brought closer to the surface, and they can release heat more easily at the surface to the surrounding outside world. So again, our blood vessels at the surface will dilate, okay, and you'll see that. And of course, then we can actually start sweating. So again, our sudoriferous glands will actually produce sweat, and that sweat will allow us to do something called evaporative cooling. So literally, as that sweat evaporates, okay, it wicks away the heat with it. So that's a process that we call evaporative cooling. Evaporative cooling, literally cooling by evaporating, okay, the sweat and wicking away heat from our body. Evaporative cooling. And so again, of course, the body responds. We don't get this very often, right? This case very often in Arizona, but the body responds to excessive cooling by just the opposite. It's going to constrict the dermal blood vessels that are, especially in areas like your extremities, to help conserve the heat into areas like your core, the core trunk of your body, where you have your major organs that need that heat to function. So again, we'll get what we call vasoconstriction, or constriction of your dermal blood vessels. And then, of course, our sweat glands will be inactivated. We don't need to do any evaporative cooling. And then we'll start to shiver. And the reason that we start to shiver is that as we start to shiver, our muscles are contracting, and they'll actually produce heat when they contract. So that will help to bring our body temperature back up closer to homeostasis. The last couple slides here are just some kind of slides that go along with skin that are more talking about kind of disease states. So of course, one of the big diseases that we are concerned with, of course, today is skin cancer. And so it's always kind of nice to talk about what are the guidelines by which, you know, when you look at something on the skin like a mole that again has this, you know, extra melanin in it, what differentiates a normal mole from something that potentially is cancerous. And so we use what's called the ABCD guidelines to help us define something that's normal versus cancerous. So A, okay, in our ABCD guidelines stands for asymmetry. And so what asymmetry means is in a normal mole here, okay, you can see that it's what we call symmetrical. So literally, if you were to break the mole in half, one half matches the other half, okay? Here, in an asymmetrical mole here, there's no real symmetry. You can see, you know, this half in no way, shape, or form matches, again, this half here. So that's the first, again, guideline. Something that, again, you would want to get looked at would be something that exhibits asymmetry, okay? Also, if you look at something and it has an irregular border, okay? An irregular border is a sign that you might have a mole that could potentially be cancerous. So if the borders of that mole are ragged or irregular, okay, then that's an indicator that you might have something potentially cancerous. Color, okay, of that, again, mole could also differentiate whether or not it's normal or cancerous. So if the color of the mole kind of varies all throughout, then that's something that you want to have looked at. So you can see it's darker here and lighter here. That's something that you want to look at. And also if the color changes, okay, throughout time. And then last thing is your diameter. So if typically we say the mole is actually, the diameter of the mole is larger than a pencil's eraser, then you should get it looked at, okay? So those are the ABCDs for skin cancer. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is burns. So generally, again, the overall, what we call systemic effects, or the effects of burns on the entire system, are a greater kind of threat to life than the local effects. And the reason being is when we have burn victims that burn a large area of their skin, okay, then typically the problem now is that we've had a major breakdown and breach in our protective layer of the body. And now our body is going to be exposed to all these foreign agents that our skin used to protect us from. So many burn victims actually die of other complications, including infection. So again, typically we consider burns to be serious when the burn area exceeds 70%, okay? And that's because when a burn area exceeds 70%, over half of the victims die. So again, this is something that we consider to be very serious in terms of burns. If a burn victim, again, has over 70% of their body burned, then chances are that that burn victim, again, is susceptible to a life-threatening condition, that they are susceptible to death. So they have this thing called the rule of nines, and I'm not going to require that you know the rule of nines, but this is just a way. I like to show this slide because some of you might be in, maybe doing some work in the accessory health fields, and so some of you do emergency medicine, and so it's kind of interesting to look at how they actually estimate what percentage of the body is burnt in a burn victim. And so that's kind of an important thing, again, if you're in the emergency field, because, again, it gives you an idea of how serious your burn victim is. So they actually kind of break up the body into these percentages, okay, that are they're typically percentages associated with 9. So 4.5 is obviously half of 9. 18 is double 9. So that's why we call it the rule of nines. And so you can see, again, they break up the body into these percentages associated with 9s. Again, I'm not going to require that you know that, but I just put it on here. It's interesting for some of you if you want to know that, but this slide is not a slide that I'm going to require you. I'm not going to require you to know the rule of nines. I do, however, want you to know the difference between a first-degree burn, okay, second-degree burn, and third-degree burn, okay, because these are terms that you probably use more commonly. A first-degree burn is when we've just damaged, okay, the epidermal layer. Okay, so this is what we see on a sunburn. Okay, on a typical, average sunburn, we've pretty much damaged the epidermal layer. Okay. And when we talk about a second-degree burn, okay, a second-degree burn is where we've actually damaged some of the dermal layer, okay? Because we've damaged some of the dermal layer that has blood vessels and things like that that run through it, you're going to see oftentimes this is where we see blisters that form. So typically if you're seeing a blister form, then you actually, again, have a second-degree burn. And again, this is where you've actually damaged some or a good portion of the dermis, okay? And then when we talk about a third-degree burn, a third-degree burn is where you've actually not only damaged the epidermis and dermis, but the subcutaneous layer below it. And this is a much more severe burn because if you remember here, again, we have blood vessels that run through the subcutaneous layer up into the dermis, and so here we've actually damaged all of these blood vessels, even the blood vessels, again, that eventually would have been used to bring nutrients to help repair the dermis. But in a third-degree burn, we've damaged those blood vessels. So that's where you see all of this black necrotic tissue here. Okay, so third-degree burns, again, are our most serious burn. That's because you've not only damaged the epidermis and the dermis, but now you've damaged the subcutaneous layer below. All right, so that concludes this lecture. And again, if you have any questions on this lecture, please feel free to contact me via email, or you can contact me again during my office hours on Illuminate from 11 to 12. And remember that you can link to that Illuminate website through WebCT. And that's probably the only way that you can really interact with me, in terms of being able to actually hear my voice. I can download slides into Illuminate. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to attend my Illuminate office hours. And again, also you can post any questions that you may have on the discussion board. So this will conclude the material for the first exam. So the first exam will cover, okay, all of the lectures through this one. So this is it. And so again, I probably will not see you for a little while, or you won't hear from me for a little while, because Dr. Trotsky will be doing your lectures for the second series of lectures for exam 2.